The cup was full. She knew it was full. She lifted it slowly, looked me directly in the eyes, and poured it over my hand. Hot coffee. Sunday morning. Everyone at the table. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. She set the cup down gently, dabbed her mouth with a napkin, and said, completely calm, "That's how we treat strangers in this house." My hand was burning. My sleeve was soaked through. I looked around the table at my father, my two brothers, my aunt. They were all looking at their plates. That's when I realized something was very wrong. I'm not someone who makes scenes. I never have been. I grew up in a house where keeping the peace meant staying quiet. You learned early that drawing attention to yourself, especially the wrong kind, came with a cost. So when things felt uncomfortable, I observed. I noted. I filed things away. I'm in my early 30s. I have a stable job. I moved back into my childhood home 8 months ago, after my father had a minor health scare. The plan was temporary, 6 months, maybe 7. Help him get back on his feet. Make sure someone was around. What I didn't account for was her. My mother and I have never been close. That's the honest version. The polite version is that we have a complicated relationship. The accurate version is that she has always treated me differently from my brothers, and for most of my life I convinced myself it wasn't intentional. People have preferences. Families are messy. I wasn't going to be the person who made everything about themselves. But in the 8 months I'd been living back home, something had shifted. Small things at first. My food was served last, always slightly cooler than everyone else's. My name was left off the group chat for family plans, trips to my uncle's house, birthday dinners, and when I mentioned it, my brother said I was being sensitive, that it was probably just an accident. My laundry was moved out of the machine mid-cycle and left damp on the floor. When I asked about it, my mother looked confused. Said she hadn't touched it. None of it was dramatic. That's the thing about this kind of behavior. It's designed not to be dramatic. It's designed to make you feel like you're the problem for noticing. I started keeping notes on my phone. Not because I thought I'd need them. Just because writing things down helped me see them more clearly. Helped me decide whether I was imagining it. The notes started to fill up faster than I expected. My father noticed something was off between us once. He brought it up gently over breakfast, just the two of us. My mother walked in mid-conversation. He stopped talking. Changed the subject. Later that day he told me he was sure it would sort itself out. I didn't push it. I'd seen that look on his face before, the careful, practiced neutrality of a man who had learned a long time ago that peace in that house had a price, and he was always the one paying it. So I didn't confront her. I didn't ask my brothers to weigh in. I didn't make it a discussion. I just watched. I paid attention to the timing. To who was in the room. To what changed when certain people were or weren't present. And slowly, something started to take shape. Something that wasn't just preference, or carelessness, or family dysfunction. It was deliberate. Consistent. Targeted. And it had been going on a lot longer than 8 months. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. 2 weeks after the coffee incident, I found the first message. I wasn't snooping. That matters to me. I wasn't going through her things. I was looking for a pen in the kitchen drawer, the one everyone uses for grocery lists and takeout menus, and I found a folded piece of paper with my name on it. Not a note to me. A note about me. It was in her handwriting. Addressed to my aunt, the same aunt who had been sitting at the brunch table and said nothing when the coffee was poured on my hand. The note talked about me moving back home as a manipulation tactic. It said I was trying to get control of my father's finances. It said, and I'm recounting this as calmly as I can, that the family needed to be protected from me. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. I photographed the note. I put it back exactly where I found it. I made myself a glass of water and I went upstairs. That night I went back through my phone notes, all the small things I'd been logging for months, and I read them differently. With the note in mind. And what looked like carelessness before started to look like something else entirely. I started to understand that there was a version of me being circulated in this family that I had never been shown. I needed to know how far it went. I purchased a small audio recorder. Legal in my state for personal use in any space I'm present in. I kept it in my shirt pocket. I wasn't recording to entrap anyone. I was recording because I needed to trust what I was hearing, because I had spent years being told I was misremembering, overreacting, being dramatic. Within 10 days, I had 3 recordings. The first was a phone conversation my mother had in the living room while I was sitting in the adjacent hallway. She was speaking to my oldest brother. She told him that she had spoken to a lawyer, her word, lawyer, about options regarding the house, and that it was important I not be told anything until it was done. I sat very still. I didn't move. The second recording was a conversation between my mother and my aunt at the kitchen table. My aunt asked directly whether my father knew what was being planned. My mother said, quietly, no hesitation, he'll understand later. He doesn't need to know right now. My father, who I had come home to take care of, who thought his house was stable, who had no idea. The third recording was the one that clarified everything. My mother, on the phone again, with someone I didn't recognize by voice. She referenced paperwork. She referenced a date, 5 weeks out. She said my name. She said the phrase out of the picture. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. I understood the whole shape of it then. I wasn't the threat she was describing to people. I was the obstacle. I was the person who was present, who was watching the finances, asking reasonable questions, accompanying my father to doctor's appointments. I was in the way. And because she couldn't move me through discomfort alone, the cold food, the exclusions, the coffee in front of everyone, she had moved to something more structured. More legal. More permanent. I thought about walking downstairs and asking her to explain herself. I thought about calling my brother and playing him the recording. I thought about a lot of things. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The next morning I woke up early. Before anyone else was downstairs, I was already in my car. The first thing I did was make copies. The recordings transferred to 2 separate cloud accounts, and 1 physical drive I left with a friend across town. The photographed note, the phone logs, the written record I'd kept on my phone, all of it backed up, time-stamped, stored in 3 separate locations. I'm not someone with a legal background, but I understood one basic principle. Evidence only protects you if it can't disappear. Then I called an elder law attorney. I'd found her name through the State Bar Association's referral service. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. That felt important. I needed someone with no existing connection to my family, no relationship to manage, no loyalty to anyone in that house. I laid out everything in the initial consultation. The timeline. The recordings. The note. The references to paperwork and a date. The phrase out of the picture. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father needs his own legal representation. Separate from anyone currently in that household. And he needs a cognitive evaluation on record. She explained what I was potentially looking at. Financial elder abuse. Undue influence. Actions taken without the knowledge or consent of a vulnerable adult. She told me the most important thing I could do was move carefully. No accusations yet. No confrontations. No warnings to anyone in the family loop. She told me she'd need to meet my father directly. That part was delicate. My father was not frail. He was not without his faculties. But he was trusting, deeply, almost willfully trusting of the people he'd spent his life with. Telling him outright, what I suspected meant putting him in the position of choosing sides, before he had the full picture. And if he mentioned anything to my mother before the legal groundwork was laid, 5 weeks of careful work could unravel overnight. So I told him I'd found a doctor I wanted him to see. For a routine follow-up. He said fine, that was fine. I scheduled the appointment and the attorney consultation on the same day, back to back. I drove him myself. He thought we were getting lunch afterward. The attorney met us at her office. She spoke to him alone for 40 minutes. When he came out, he was quiet. Not upset, just quiet. The kind of quiet that means someone is reorganizing information they thought they already understood. He didn't ask me a lot of questions on the way home. He looked out the window. That evening, my mother made dinner as usual. Set the table. Asked my father about his day. He said fine. Said he'd been tired. She nodded, touched his shoulder, and went back to the kitchen. She was relaxed. Comfortable. She had no reason not to be. My brothers came over that weekend. There was a football game on. My mother made her usual spread of food. Everyone laughed at something. I sat at the edge of the room and watched her move through the house, easy, unhurried, absolutely certain she was in control of what was coming. The date she'd mentioned on the phone was now less than 2 weeks away. She had no idea that 3 days before that date, a different set of paperwork had already been filed. She had no idea that my father had signed documents with independent legal counsel. She had no idea that I had submitted the recordings and the written log to an Adult Protective Services intake coordinator, who had opened a formal inquiry. She poured herself a cup of coffee, and sat down in her usual chair. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The morning it happened, I made breakfast. Nothing special. Eggs. Toast. Coffee. I set the table the same way I always did and I sat down and I waited. At 9:15, there was a knock at the door. My mother answered it. 2 people stood on the porch, one from the Adult Protective Services office, one was my father's attorney. Behind them, parked at the curb, was a car belonging to a county investigator the attorney had coordinated with. My mother's expression didn't collapse all at once. It shifted, very slowly, from ordinary morning surprise to something more careful. She stepped back and let them in. My father was already at the table. He had known they were coming. He had known for 4 days. He hadn't said anything to her, not because I asked him not to, but because he told me quietly, the night after he met with the attorney, that he needed a few days to sit with what he'd learned. I respected that. I didn't push him. The conversation that followed was not loud. That's the thing I want to be clear about. There was no confrontation in the way people imagine confrontations. No shouting. No moment where I stood up and delivered a speech. It wasn't like that. The attorney explained the documents that had been filed without my father's knowledge or consent, documents that, had they proceeded on the original timeline, would have restructured access to his accounts and removed me from any medical decision-making authority. He explained the recordings. He explained what they indicated, and what had been submitted to the formal inquiry. My mother sat very still. She said once, quietly, that it wasn't what it looked like. Nobody in the room responded to that. My brothers were contacted separately. The older one, the one on the recordings, retained his own attorney within 48 hours. That told me what I needed to know about how prepared he'd been for this possibility. The younger one called me that night. He said he hadn't known. I believe him. He was crying, and I don't think he's a good enough actor for that to be performance. The formal inquiry stayed open for 11 weeks. During that time, my mother moved out of the house. Not under legal order, her attorney advised it. My father didn't ask her to leave. He also didn't ask her to stay. He said very little about it publicly. He went to his appointments. He ate regularly. He slept better than he had in months. He told me that himself one evening over dinner, almost as an aside, like it was a small and unremarkable thing. There were financial consequences. The accounts that had been partially restructured, without his awareness, were reviewed and corrected. A limited conservatorship was put in place, not because my father couldn't manage his own affairs, but because his attorney recommended a documented oversight structure given what had been attempted. My name was not on it. A neutral third party was appointed. My father agreed to that immediately. Said it was fair. I stayed in the house for 2 more months. Then I found an apartment 15 minutes away, close enough, but mine. The night before I moved out, my father and I sat on the back porch for a while. Neither of us talked much. He asked me once if I was going to be okay. I said yes. He nodded and looked at the yard. I thought about the Sunday morning with the coffee. The silence around that table. The careful, practiced way everyone had looked at their plates. I didn't bring it up. There was nothing left to say about it. Some things don't need a final word. They just need to be over. I packed the last of my boxes in the morning and loaded my car. I drove away without looking back. That night, everything was quiet.